As you travel to Fort Lancaster and you enter the Pecos River Valley, you can feel the soldiers marching around you. It's important to preserve this historic site for future generations where you can stand here and feel what it was like to be on the western frontier.
At the end of the Mexican War in 1848, the primary need in the country was communication in an all-weather route to California because of the gold rush. It was critical, and of course that route came through Texas.
There were two main routes to the west, the Upper Road and the Lower Road. The U.S. Army established forts along these trails to protect the frontier from Native American groups who were already feeling squeezed by westward expansion.
Before the road, this land was possessed, of course, by the Native Americans, the Lipan Apache and the Comanche, who had been in the area since the 1500s and, felt very possessive about it. It was a difficult trip across, and you could go as an individual on the stagecoach, or you could go in a group or a train of wagons that went together for self-protection.
Travelers on the Lower Road faced a daunting 300-mile journey between the relative safety of Fort Clark and Fort Davis. Wagon trains and stagecoaches were vulnerable to deadly raids by Native American tribes acting in defense of their territory. On July 20th, 1855, the U.S. Army established a military camp that would become Fort Lancaster to increase security along the Lower Road.
The officers came to Lancaster were from West Point. The soldiers themselves, the enlisted men, were mostly immigrants, German and Irish primarily, with very few prospects, sometimes without even a real command of English. And this was the way to survive. It sounds rather boring to be marching up and down the road protecting mail stagecoaches and immigrants moving west, but that's what settled the West.
Although soldiers fought in the occasional skirmish with Native Americans, everyday life at Fort Lancaster was filled with repetitive chores and drills.
It was grueling. It was hard. There was not a lot of entertainment.
There were also certain, vices that most of these soldiers brought with them to the frontier. And of course, alcohol was one of the primary ones. One of the more creative punishments was the barrel coat, where a soldier was required to wear a barrel. You would stand in the barrel with straps over your shoulders to hold the barrel up, and you were required to do your marching while wearing a barrel. Life changed significantly for the troops at Fort Lancaster when Texas seceded from the Union and joined the Confederacy. General David Twiggs, who was the commanding officer in Texas, turned over all federal property to the state government and ordered the federal troops out of Texas.
The Confederates allowed U.S. troops to leave peacefully with their arms and equipment before occupying Fort Lancaster themselves. With most troops needed on the front lines of the Civil War, the Confederate Army only periodically staffed Texas frontier forts. In their absence, Native Americans increased their raids on Texas western settlements as Fort Lancaster fell into disrepair. After the Civil War, the U.S. Army's Buffalo Soldiers reoccupied Fort Lancaster. Although it would never serve as a full-fledged fort again, it would be used as a subpost.
The black soldiers, the African American soldiers, the United States colored troops, post-Civil War, presented opportunity. Yesterday I was a slave, today I'm free.
In 1867, the Buffalo Soldiers at Fort Lancaster fended off hundreds of attackers, including Kickapoo Indians, renegade soldiers, and other outlaws, in one of the only assaults by Native Americans on a U.S. Army fort in Texas.
This battle is an example of the fighting spirit and bravery of the African American soldiers and removed any doubt of their effectiveness as combat soldiers in the United States Army.
By the late 1870s, the fort was abandoned and crumbling from exposure and neglect. Eventually, locals began carrying off the building's limestone blocks to construct their homes and businesses nearby. Today, the Texas Historical Commission oversees Fort Lancaster and preserves the fort for the public. Through these efforts, they are keeping the memory of the many soldiers and civilians who called the fort home alive and preserving the history of one of the United States' most isolated forts on the western frontier.